So the topic today is about this challenge that we are having right now with, at the end of the day, with trust and from a national exchange perspective. I know we've got Dan that has a long, excellent history in regional health information exchange. And I think the regional health information exchange efforts, you know, they do just a wonderful job of establishing trust at a community level. And the reality is it's harder to establish trust at a national level. And I think what we're seeing is, the challenges associated with doing just that. And as we start to see potential bad things happen or suspected bad things happen, I think there's this tendency for everyone to retreat to their own corners, think about their own interests. And of course, all of us have our own interests. Those interests are important. But those interests, what we want to be careful of is we don't let those self-interests get in the way of trust. And I think the positive outcomes that we're trying to achieve through national exchange. And also, I think we need to remember what got us here and remember there's multiple ways of doing healthcare data exchange. So even when we're maybe running into some challenges on the national level, there are other avenues. And I don't think you have to look any further than the CMS interoperability framework work to recognize that the federal government understands that. They didn't just come in and say TEFCA is the only way to exchange data at scale. And I think as businesses or as stakeholders or providers, it's important to remember there's lots of ways that data can be exchanged effectively and in an efficient manner. For those of you who may be attending this call for the very first time, just to introduce who we are, I'm Marilee Benson, president and co-founder of Zen Healthcare IT. We have a couple other folks from Zen on the call, Karen, our director of marketing, Stephen, our account executive, and a number of Zen customers. Thank you very much participating in the call, which we greatly appreciate, but we usually get a nice mix of different kinds of people that do participate in this call. Zen as a company is an interoperability platform company. We combine our very robust interoperability platform and set of technology tools with our super smart subject matter experts around interoperability. And we support both what I would consider local exchange or direct integrations, kind of traditional healthcare interfaces, as well as being a gateway and access point for national exchange. And I know there's a number of the folks on this call that are participating in national exchange through Zen or other partners. So as I mentioned, one of the key things we want to talk about today is this challenge between our own interests and this problem of trust. And we're going to talk a little bit about, where are we with trust from a national exchange perspective? I think the reality is that there have been some demonstrated cases over the last several years where we've had some genuine bad actors. And then that starts to erode trust, and it's kind of a snowball rolling down the hill. Then we have other potential suspicious actors, and maybe certain people or entities don't think the networks and the governance is moving fast enough to deal with that. Other bad things start happening. And again, it's that snowball rolling down the hill effect. We're going to talk about the result. I think the biggest result is we've got this lawsuit feeding frenzy happening. So we're going to take just a quick peek at what I mean by that. We're going to talk about how that overall environment is impacting the governance around the national exchange. Certainly a focus on TEFCA today, but TEFCA and care equality are tightly coupled. And so what affects TEFCA often affects care equality. What affects care equality often affects TEFCA. It's very important to understand that, just kind of being a fundamental truth. And then we're going to talk about what to do about that and how do we as providers or as business owners who really need to leverage scalable exchange, kind of not lean into the punch, but consider our options to most effectively operate in this environment. And that's really where I want to talk a little bit more about these optional exchange purposes, or what is sometimes referred to as pick your own trading partner. So let's talk about the lawsuit frenzy. So I think most of you are familiar with the Epic Particle Health lawsuit where they each sued each other. That's still ongoing. It is unbelievable that it is still ongoing, but it is. And by the way, for those of you who are interested in following the legal side of healthcare data exchange, from many perspectives, the absolute, in my opinion, best source for that is Brendan Keeler's Health API Guide publication. If you have not signed up for his site, I highly recommend that you subscribe to it because it's really phenomenal, the information that he makes available. So I wanted to pop into one of his articles that talks about the Epic and Health Gorilla lawsuit spinoff. And it is crazy how many, in such a short period of time, how many additional lawsuits have spun out of that. And this is a visual representation. You can see there's basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-ish, if my math is correct, individual lawsuits that are spinning out of that one original lawsuit. And obviously that's having a lot of impacts. And we're going to talk about some of those impacts. By the way, if you scroll down, you can see they've got more details. You can click into the individual cases here if you're interested in following those. And I will say that some of these cases are, sorry, that should not have happened. Some of these cases are patients suing, I am putting them in the category perhaps of ambulance chasers, but it's where, somebody accuses someone of, being a bad actor, then a patient gets an attorney and then jumps right into that fray. So, I don't want to dismiss patients' legitimate rights to protect the privacy of their data, but I think most of us here would probably agree that there is probably some taking advantage of the situation going on. And that's very unfortunately. So the result of this, all of a sudden these multiple lawsuits feeding out of just one particular initial lawsuit. And the other thing, of course, that's notable is that these are 2 QHINs. So it's really the first time that we've had TEFCA-based exchange get involved in a lawsuit situation. The other thing that's notable is each one of these networks, Carequality and TEFCA, have dispute processes, but the people that filed the lawsuit, for whatever reason, didn't want to wait on the dispute process. And I think that is, if I had to guess, and I have no inside information whatsoever, that is a attempt to exert some pressure to try to stop bad behavior, get press, and make a statement that they're not going to just wait for governance to which moves slowly. Even though we've tried, Carequality has an updated dispute process, tried to move things along faster, it still is a process. Now, I will tell you, lawsuits move slower than the processes related to filing a lawsuit, but what moves fast is the press and the publicity that comes out of that. Now, a couple of the specific things, the one that I can specifically reference here is, many of you probably saw that the AMA recently wrote a letter to the RCE specifically about proposed changes to the IAS draft SOPs. And you can see they're specifically referencing a proposed, not a final IAS. It was numbered version 3.0. That was, and I don't even know, quite honestly, if this hit draft mode, but it is notable that they reacted very strongly enough that they didn't just put their feedback directly through the QHIN process, TEFCA process. They had the AMA write a letter. And the letter is basically asking that they want to push back against a tremendous amount of pressure that they were getting internally, QHIN to QHIN, to stop doing the extra login for the Epic IES workflow. And I know many of you on this call, are aware of the kind of push and pull. The IES, people investing in IES clearly have already asked patients to do a lot with the high level ILA2 level identity vetting, and other EMRs like Athena Health are responding without, the patient having to do extra work. There's a very high bar, I wouldn't say pretty high bar, a high bar for IES vendors in terms of privacy and security notices. And so it feels unfair when you're in that seat. On the other side, however, especially given all of these lawsuits that have suddenly popped out everywhere, in my opinion, the providers do have a legitimate liability concern. Where does that liability rest? And that's where I think the conversation is landing. But the reality is we've had this situation where the AMA wrote a letter to the RCE, to Marianne specifically. I've got the link here so that you can take a look at it if you haven't seen it. And I think, I have no inside information, but I just can kind of see through the conversations, the more public conversations that I am in, that you do have a bit of a hardening of positions, right? A hardening of people trying to represent their own interest and protect themselves. And so it feels like it's not quite as collaborative as maybe it was a couple of years ago. Now, working groups are still doing their work. And so I don't want to say that there is no progress happening. There is. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So as we go, I wanted to have a conversation with the folks on this call early here in the call as opposed to later, because I really want us to talk about this. So I want to kind of repeat a little bit about what I just commented on. I truly believe that all stakeholders have legitimate interest and legitimate concerns. I think providers want to protect patient data. Those lawsuits show that their concern about liability is actually real. It's not to say they don't have liability or risk in other areas, but certainly, I don't think you can dismiss those concerns entirely. Patients legitimately want easier access to their own healthcare data. Individual access service providers are playing a very important role in enabling that. Very important part of the overall CMS interoperability, ecosystem, and certainly a high priority for, the federal government, as well as, many other stakeholders and healthcare. And then, well, we're not going to be really talking a lot about payers today. I think payers legitimately, most of them want to do their jobs better and faster, and sicker patients aren't necessarily their best interest. And as we continue on in expanding the exchange purposes and adoption of those exchange purposes, payers will become more, I think, legitimate network exchange participants. And I think finally, even though QHINs are suing each other, or at least we've had a case of two doing that, I do think, in my experience and working very closely with many care equality implementers and many QHINs, those folks are doing their best to perform vetting of network participants, but they're operating in an environment of rapidly changing rules and with outdated regulations like HIPAA that make it just difficult, where there's a lot of gray area. And so a lot of the work that's happening right now is to try to get rid of some of this gray area so that people then, again, can represent their own interests, but reach a place of trust with one another. So here's where I'm going to turn it over to you guys, and I am going to get my little participant list pulled up here. What I'd really like folks to comment on is this. I've just kind of thrown some questions out here to seed conversation, but I want to know how you're feeling about the current situation we're in, whether in terms of healthcare data exchange, whether it's TEFCA or regional HIE exchange. How is it affecting you, your constituents, or your organization? Because of what's been going on, are you adapting or pivoting? What specific recommendations do you have? How do you think the federal government can help? So that's kind of me throwing things out to the group. I'm going to just say right now, anyone who wants to open their microphone and throw some opinions out there, please do so. And if I don't get any people volunteering, I will ask you for your opinions. Do we have any volunteers?
I'll go, Marilee.
Thank you, Dan. I knew I could count on you.
It's all very interesting. It's like national politics. It's interesting to watch. It's not our focus. We have enough to do in our state and in our county, so maybe it garners 10% of our attention on a bad day,
Yep.
but that's not the focus. It's kind of silly in many ways and a waste of time. Being a regional guy, as you pointed out, we don't have a national healthcare system. So why are we trying to do interoperability nationally? In the state of California, we have 61 disparate, unique healthcare markets. In my humble opinion, if we want to really make an impact on healthcare, it's got to be at the county level. So there you go. I've kicked it off, Marilee.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. And I do think, and one of the things, we've had many conversations with at the regional HIE level, state HIE level, and Civitas and other forums, is how important the community-based HIEs are to convening trust and creating an environment where people can sit at the table across from one another and hash out these differences, no matter what kind of stakeholder they are. And then it's still hard, even I've been in some communities where it's still hard, right? And so you can only imagine if it's hard at the county level, how hard it can be at the national level. My personal opinion is it doesn't mean that we stop doing national exchange, because I still think, people travel, people don't just stay in one place, and we've got to solve that problem too. But I agree with you that the regional exchange it is just tremendously valuable. And I am glad that when the CMS interoperability framework and ecosystem, came out, that there wasn't just a one size fits all thinking there, that this concept of picking your trading partners and establishing, other kinds of networks, and not to mention just leveraging the networks that exist already and have existed, way before the national exchange existed, very important. So to me, it's all of the above. It's but I definitely hear you and agree with you on many of those thoughts.
You would say the national exchanges don't have that right level of governance. I mean, that's an underlying theme he has in a lot of his publications. National Exchange does work. Friendly reminder, when we started eHealth Exchange in 2010, it was largely the two corner anchor tenants were the Department of Defense and the VA.
Yep.
And having started the HIE in San Diego, I can tell you National Exchange works as it relates to the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. And other federal agencies now are starting to, come to the table for sure. All right. Thank you, Dan. Who else would like to volunteer with some comments? Tom, you still on?
Yep, I'm here.
I would love to hear your perspective. Obviously, you represent a health tech vendor who's leveraging exchange. Y'all are doing individual access services right now. You have other use cases, including treatment-based exchange that are probably will happen in the future. I'm just curious, and we're going to go into some more details specifically around IAS and kind of what's happening there, but just curious, what have you guys been observing and how are you thinking about it?
I don't have much to comment on. I mean, just the sooner the better for us. The faster we get the data in, the faster we can go to market and start delivering medical records to the masses. And we're poised and ready to go. So I'm sorry I don't have very much insight beyond that, but that's what I can share with you.
I appreciate it. We do. I think you represent that just let's just make it work for individual access services, especially given the investment that y'all have made. All of, and I see several people that are actively, working at individual access services here. Absolutely. I know that there's a, let's just get her done, attitude. And we're going to continue to operate, certainly in the rest of 2026, an environment where there's going to be a lot of change happening. But I think most of that change is happening in order to move things forward in a positive way. And Karen, let me know if someone puts a hand up. Let's see. I've got Ed Donaldson. Ed, are you with us?
Hey there.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So, I mean, the way I'm thinking about it is having been working with HIEs back in, 09, 10, 11, 12, Commonwealth and 13, 14, going back that far. And now, trying to really ramp up. What was it? TEFCA started it under CARES in 2016. It almost seems like we're going backwards. As you say right there on the screen, now we're tightening up treatment, and there was an interesting discussion this week from Dr. Kendrick about the HIEs and patient-centered data home. It's almost like, the HIEs have their groups and how they manage the different policies and the state requirements, which I think is going to, be part of what, hampers it nationally. It's almost like, we almost got to get away from this one size fits all. So, I mean, that's kind of the current feeling of me with the way the current, treatment changes are, with the way the current IAS changes are, and but there's also it's got to go beyond treatment and even IAS, and because there's such a need and a value for the information if people will use it correctly. So.
Yes, and we're going to talk about some of those optional use cases. It's actually to me, the best things TEFCA has done is they've got a very long list of exchange purposes, even though the mandatory response ones are kind of small right now. And that's why I want to talk about getting us all kind of challenging all of us to think about, I think from a national perspective, we just land in this place of, well, if it's not mandatory response, it's not going to work. And I think that given the current environment, we have to change that thinking, and we have to change that thinking to say we either rely on our regional HIE, partners when they exist, but they don't exist everywhere. So, we've got to remember that at the end of the day, this is about relationships and trust, and we need to remember that we've got to have these conversations, that two parties that agree under terms and conditions under a framework to exchange data is workable.
Right. But it's just
yeah.
a pain to have to go get back
It
to
is.
individual things, just like
Yeah.
you're, connecting to individual hospital here, individual doctor there, from an EHR perspective, going back, 20 years. So.
And that's where I think maybe if we separate the technical from the business side, let's assume the technical rails are there through the national network. And really, it's the business conversation that we're having around the trust. To me, that's what the optional use cases do for us. It makes sure that there's no technical work that has to be done, but it just shifts the focus to the business side of the conversation. But valid point. We certainly, especially I think for individual access services, we need to get to frictionless. And I think it's really a question of what's it going to take to get us there. Right. And I actually think some of the interesting things that are coming out of even that AMA letter could get us there sooner rather than later, but we need the government's help. We need some regulatory changes that will impact liability. And if we can do that, it's like, I think we got to get to the core root of the problem and get the right people addressing it or the right entity addressing it. And then I think, we've laid such a solid foundation otherwise that I think that could be a complete game changer. I always hate to put my hope all on, the federal government, but still, I think the reality is that they have a role to play. And I think the reason, in my opinion, TEFCA exists is because of individual access services never getting any traction under carry quality, period, none. So we have to call a win a win. We have some progress. All right. Ed, thank you so much. Okay. Does anyone else want to jump in? Otherwise, I will keep going. All right. I very well may call on more people later though. So what are the immediate impacts? So a couple of things. Carry Quality is in the process of building trust work group. You can count on this group ending up, there again, just remember there's this very tight feedback loop between Carry Quality and TEFCA. So any great problem solving that Carry Quality manages to achieve or ideas that come out of that, I think could affect TEFCA. And I think as the TEFCA work groups continue to work together, same thing will happen in the reverse. There's a new Carry Quality dispute resolution process. There is a new QHIN consequences of non-compliance for QHIN's SOP that's going into effect here in just a matter of days. And then we have just some continued ongoing evolution of both treatment, which includes regular treatment and required treatment. It includes vetting and this clearer definitions of use cases that apply to required treatment. And then our IES updates. And this is the one I think there's certainly a lot of back and forth happening around the definition of required treatment and this narrowing of what treatment means. But I feel like where there's the most debate is still in the individual access services arena. The newest draft, and if you go into change management, you'll see that there were, it's the first time I've seen this happen, where there was an original draft put out, the comments happened, the AMA letter happened, although I'm not sure of exactly the timing, and then there's a new May dated change, IAS, which is different. This new draft, and if you haven't read it, I do highly recommend that you do. You'll notice that all the dates are on some of these new requirements are marked as TBD. So that's a little confusing. But I would say in general, we're probably seeing a bit of a pause in the pressure of removing Epic's extra login requirement, which I think some of us were hoping might go away faster rather than later. And I think now my sense is it's probably going to be around longer. These are some of the SOPs that I'm taking a deep dive in. I do want to call your attention that for both of the exchange purpose vetting SOP and the required treatment SOP, those comments are due tomorrow. So if you want to comment, be sure to take a look at the red lines and the clean version so you'll know what's potentially changing. And then for the individual access services SOP, I believe that one is June 5th, so you have a little longer. So for the vetting, I'm actually pretty happy about the changes proposed in the exchange purpose vetting process SOP. Not because of these dates here, I just kind of referenced the fact that one of the changes is they have some new definitions. The RCE is going to publish the pertinent dates that apply for this process for reviewing new TEFCA participants, which they call entrants. And they're kind of formalizing the process of how this review process is going to work. So just be aware of that. It's a good idea to read through that section closely. And the other thing that I actually think is very good is that the SOP actually says, when it talks about this process that we talked about here above, there's this objection period. Well, one of the things they do here is they actually comment on and are trying to provide some guidance on, you probably shouldn't object if it's one of these 4 situations. So they're just kind of trying to, I think, reduce the amount of potential objections they get. The way they worded it is in this current draft, it will typically not be found to substantiate an objection. So if a provider provides a limited range of treatment services, maybe they're not a full healthcare provider, like a primary care provider or an orthopedic doctor, but they're doing something limited. Maybe they're just helping with, well, I don't know why I did that. Sorry. Whoa. Okay, let me go back to my slideshow. Sorry, folks, my internet is, I think, acting up a bit. Okay. Let me, the slideshow is not working. There we go. Okay, we'll do it this way. So these, I think, these are good. This is a pushback to say, look, you can't just push back on somebody because they do both treatment and non-treatment services, or because they may be using the secondary use of this information for some reason you don't like, or because they don't have a direct physical interaction with an individual patient. Maybe they have a text relationship with the patient, but they're providing treatment services. So I feel like this was actually, I think this is going to be very helpful. The other thing that I think is really, really good is that if you read the current treatment vetting process, it is very complicated. I have personally tried to whiteboard this 3 paths for vetting out for our customers and have never successfully achieved a simple way of thinking about it. And what they've done is replaced it with one consistent process. And I think it's just going to be much easier to understand. And if it's much easier to understand, it's going to be much easier to operationalize consistently. And that's going to help the QHINs and those of us who essentially act as candidate QHINs, or, you know, our access points for TEFCA. And then the other thing that is kind of consistent, but I think has been expanded a bit, is we still rely heavily on vetting evidence needed to prove that providers are engaging in HIPAA covered transactions. So that's the one thing that has not been fixed. If a provider is delivering care without engaging in one of these HIPAA standard transactions, that's still going to be a problem. All right, so let's look quickly at this new process. You can see we have basically 10 steps, some of which is, you know, simply the QHIN name. So basically, we're just getting demographic data about the new entrant, their website, their site of care address. If they have it, it's okay if they don't. They just need to describe, if they don't have a site of care, how they do provide care, NPI, the type of healthcare provider, evidence that they're a covered entity. And if the principal, if the entrant is not using a certified EMR, well, certified or non-certified, if they're not doing the query from an EMR, and this applies a lot to people who are doing, who are using a secondary piece of technology that sits next to their primary EHR and it's used to trigger queries. We often call that a delegation scenario. If that's the case, where the queries are coming from outside of an EMR, you simply describe the workflow that triggers those queries. And then finally, if the entrant themselves is not a HIPAA covered entity, but it has clients or children that are covered entities, then you can simply provide then what evidence you would provide would be your child that is in fact the covered entity. In terms of the evidence, one of the big wins here is that it's more clear that doing a healthcare eligibility benefit is an eligible HIPAA transaction, which it should have been included all along. They also clarified that the NCPDP. By the way, I kind of jumped to a conclusion that meant that electronic prescribing would meet the HIPAA requirement. It doesn't, because e-prescribing did not exist when the HIPAA regulations were written. But NCPDP did exist, and so that would help a pharmacy who is a legitimate potential participant in a treatment-based exchange. So we have a broader set of HIPAA transactions spelled out, and also the language basically says that they use the word a document demonstrating that within the last 90 days, that's a clarification. It can't have been, a year ago that they're engaged in one or more of these transactions. So they're not saying it has to be the message itself. They're saying a document, and I think it will be very interesting to see what kind of documents end up making that evidence up. This is going to be interesting, but I think just overall, if you combine this slide with this, overall, this is easier than it has been. It doesn't mean that non-covered entities can engage in exchange, however. I think in terms of the changes for the exchange purpose treatment SOP, I think this whole concept of know your participant and just a whole litany of questions to get your participant to answer has now evolved to know your participant's use case for treatment-based exchange. By the way, I am zeroing in on required treatment. You can do treatment-based exchange that is the regular treatment where a response is not mandatory without necessarily hitting all these vetting. But I think they've done a good job of clarifying under what circumstances can this required treatment be used. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. I won't read it all for you, but I think a couple of the notables are, it just helps clarify what the delivery of care means that you might make a query for. And things like care management and identification of care gaps for a patient, consulting with another provider about a patient are definitely use cases where we've seen a gray areas that I think has now been clarified. Okay, I am going to pause because I covered a lot of information. I see a few people are having to drop off. Any questions or comments about these changes related to required treatment? Okay. Yes, the deck will be shared for sure. I'm going through this quickly, and I purposely put a lot of detail in here so that you could have it as a reference. So yeah, you just if you could just shoot us an email and asking for it, then and Karen, can you put your email in the chat box, and that way everyone will know they can email you and get a copy of the document of this PowerPoint. All right. The IAS exchange purpose SOP requirements, this is where we had an initial draft come out, and then that draft basically went by the wayside. Now we have a second draft, and this is the one that we have till June 5th to respond to. So first of all, there were a number, I think, of very positive clarifications around the technical aspects of how the demographic data required from your CSP, which is your ID.me or your clears, the token handling requirements, and kind of what version, what standards version should be supported. It then clarifies on the IAS vendor side the requirements related to the demographic data that must be included in the query through their QHIN. And then we get to the part that I think I was disappointed in, and where I think we were hoping to see a future that was clearly laid out where we would eliminate the additional authentication model that is currently being used by Epic. So the way this particular SOP describes two options, so mode 1 and mode 2. Mode 1 is this scenario where the patient, after doing the identity vetting with ID.me or Clear and doing all the token exchange, you still, when the patient, in order for the patient to retrieve their data from Epic endpoints, they still have to authenticate again via their MyChart logins. Model 2, which is the way Athena Health does it, and pretty much as far as we know, everyone else, works just like treatment-based exchange does via a patient demographic matching. Obviously, it's different in that we've got these different token requirements that you don't have with treatment, but otherwise, in terms of, you send out a patient query, and Athena will tell you, here's the documents we have available, and then you can pull those documents down, and other than that initial identity vetting and the token exchange, everything else works like treatment. And so what they've done here is now formalize the fact that there's a mode 1 and a mode 2. And then they've added some additional requirements around this mode 2, which is the way Athena Health works today. And this is probably the most controversial. And this is where the ISP, the IAS technology, if they do get a response back from, let's say, Athena Health, you have to do a demographic, what they call a demographic double check, which basically means that Athena Health, when they respond, is going to respond with the demographics they used in the match. And then the ISP is expected to check those demographics to say, okay, does that align reasonably well with what we know to be true about this patient? And if you cannot answer yes to that question, then you do not proceed with the rest of the query. You do not pull documents back. And you have to notify the QHIN of a potential patient matching issue. So again, if you are an IAS vendor or you're thinking about being one, it is absolutely essential that you go read this new draft SOP for IAS and get your comments in prior to June 5th. So pulling back now, from a national exchange perspective, where are we? Care providers that do not engage in HIPAA standard transactions currently cannot pass vetting for required treatment. Still, and many of you have heard me talk about this, Epic has a business rule that says they're going to follow the TEFCA required treatment vetting. And so Epic will not enroll a new care equality entry without doing that review. And if they're not a covered entity, and you can't provide the evidence that they're a covered entity, they do not turn that new endpoint on. And I know Zen has been in the middle of helping facilitate those conversations. I'm sure some of you doing treatment-based exchange may have run into that. The other gap, of course, is that the IAS draft SOPs don't quickly move us down the path of frictionless exchange with Epic. And who knows in the future, we don't know what other EMRs are going to do, other than we've had people say, I've had other EMRs tell me they're not going to be doing what Epic is doing. They may do a FHIR endpoint, but they're not planning this extra authentication. But I think the proof will be, we'll have to test with each EMR and see what they're really doing. And I think the biggest problem is timing on this is just increasingly difficult to predict where we are right now. But what's the positive side? I think we have to, like I said earlier, acknowledge that we were doing essentially no individual access services exchange of data prior to 2026. So that's a win. It's not necessarily going to be the only way that individual access service vendors get data. And I think that IAS vendors, especially given that we don't think there's a quick fix right now, need to jump through those Epic hoops in order to get data from Epic. And I think the biggest positive that's probably not being talked a lot about now is, remember, there is going to be a centralized MyChart login. And so right now you might be seeing that you're getting three or five different MyChart logins if you have a lot of Epic individual facilities if you're in a large metropolitan area, for example, or you've traveled a lot for care. That is supposed to be going away sometime this summer. And believe me, I am going to be asking our Epic friends when that's going to be widely available, because I do think if you go from 5 MyChart logins to 1, while it is a barrier, it's not going to be nearly as much of a barrier. And then finally, I just think that just because it's mandatory does not mean exchange will never happen. It just means that you need to do some work to align your interests. Expand your focus, make the case for exchange with your community partners. So I would like to see us start thinking more about the non-required treatment, the regular treatment, as being a rational option for, especially for those gaps where we've left providers out, important providers in a community that are private pay. So for example, like a local nursing home or a prison, for example, or some of the examples of the people have given us on these calls, but that don't technically, they're not filing insurance in the traditional way, so they're not meeting that TEFCA barrier. I think certainly you're seeing regional HIEs enable this in a lot of communities, these particular use cases, but I think where we don't have HIEs that can fill that gap, that treatment does give you the TREATMENT exchange purpose. Let's stakeholders come together and agree to exchange data. And one of the important things to understand is in the past, and certainly if you look under care equality and some other types of exchange, only one kind of exchange purpose was ever supported. And it was hard to do these optional other use cases because the EMR didn't support it. In TEFCA, the QHINs must support all these exchange purposes. And so it can't be a technology problem. It can't be that Epic or CERN or Oracle or ECW we literally can't process that exchange purpose. They're QHINs. They have to process that exchange purpose. So that really does put the decision in the hands of the health systems and providers as opposed to in the vendors. And I think that's really important. By the way, I also think that regional HIEs have a possibility of, one reason why they might want to join TEFCA and participate in the rails, the technology rails that exist with TEFCA, is they do have an opportunity to really support these optional use cases in a way, because they have that second layer of governance that individual organizations don't have the ability to do. So I will be talking to some of my regional HIE friends who are still thinking about TEFCA about that. All right, I have talked more than I wanted to. I want to open it back up for some final thoughts. There's still a lot of people on the call. I'm very appreciative of that. Mary, you're still on the call. I would love to learn a little bit more about you. Did she just hop off? I think she did. Martin or Kira, I'll let either one of you jump in. Any thoughts as we close things out? See, I shouldn't have let there be a either or there. Chad, go for it.
Yeah, interesting you calling me. I'm really just an observer at this point. So it is interesting to watch it. I've obviously been working this for quite a few years now, and it does. You're trying not to be too disappointed with the progress. You can totally see both sides of it in my mind, and so you have to, in order to get through it, you got to understand that piece of it. And I think you can see again everybody's side of it. And you hit it early on. It's self-interest is driving a lot of this, but that's just natural, really.
Yeah.
So that'd probably be my point on this.
Exactly. And I think my point is we just need to keep talking with one another and providing value, you creating demonstrations. And I think the optional use cases that are so many of them, payment operations, you know, if you go look at I challenge each of you to go look at the exchange purposes SOP under TEFCA, there's just so many opportunities to exchange with, you know, this agreement of here's how we're going to exchange, you know, from a business perspective, working out the business side. Sean, I'd love to hear from you. I still see you're on the call.
Hello there.
Hi,
Can you hear me now?
Sean. Yes.
All right. Let me turn on my camera. I've been the fly on the wall. I don't have much comments except only complaints. Same complaints that we recently implemented IAS and we had hands-on experience with IAS. And gosh, this the workflow is only Athena Health. That part is streamlined. We love it a lot. I retrieved my Athena records seamlessly. I never retrieved those records before.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
very impressive, except I got duplicates.
Yeah.
One is from Athena, the central EHR. The other one is from that particular clinics. So identical records, but from two different entrants. That's the duplication issue. I guess we can solve that. I just don't know why they give me two same records from two different entrants. I mean, one is from the central one, the other one is from the particular clinic. I don't know why they're doing that.
Yeah, and you know, just remember there are technical contacts published in the directories, and I would use those. I mean, the great, you know, thank heavens, hey, we're seeing success, yay, win. Okay, now we need the get flowing. It does expose those other problems that you can then work on solving. And so
Yeah,
again,
I
I think
think
that's an opportunity, but
yeah, that problem we can solve on our end. We can compare the documents. We can do it on our end, but gosh, on the Epic end is a pain in the ass now.
Yeah.
I have hoped because I have multiple Epic providers connections. I have scripts and I have UCSD. Okay, I have hoped once they tell me, okay, you have records in both locations, you just need to sign up once. You just log in any of them, you get records from the rest of my charts. For example, if I log in my scripts and my identity was double verified by Epic, then they should use UCSD records as well. That's my hope. Okay,
and that's coming. That's
my chart central.
Yeah, that's my chart central, right? And I think I'm a little surprised it hasn't gotten out yet, but because I think they announced that last August or something, that I guess welcome to the world of a big EMR vendor. But I do think that will help. And then the other thing that I think it's still early. So ECW, eClinical Works is another one that I do think we will start seeing increasing amount of documents available from. When they originally rolled out their QHIN, they did not default their new providers when they were moving them over from Carry Quality to Commonwealth, or sorry, to TEFCA, to being IAS opted in. And they have since changed that after getting a lot of pushback from the industry. And I think that you will start seeing more and more data coming from eClinical Works. We actually have invited eClinical Works to be on one of our office hours or interop workshops. I don't have the commitment yet, but we're trying because we think that we really like to hear from them directly where they are on a number of fronts, in particular their IAS implementation. And then, of course, Oracle is just kind of getting started. They don't have a lot of Oracle facilities enrolled yet because they were one of the last QHINs, but we should start to see that increase a lot in the future.
Hey, Matt,
those are good direction.
Your 3-minute reminder.
Thank you. Yes, and I appreciate those of you who have held on the whole time.
Just last question. Do you guys have heard anything about VA? When will VA opt in into IAS network? Have you guys heard
So
any news about it?
I have not, and I need to remember to bring that up to Paul at Commonwealth or some of my other QHIN contacts. If you read the SOP, it makes it, and it's a little complex language, but it to me, what it does is it carve out the federal partners to the extent that's basically, well, they can respond if they choose to. I think if you read the letter of the SOP language with federal partners, and so it's an excellent question because I don't think we should assume they're never going to choose to. I think that we just need to keep ask the question, what's happening in those conversations, what's stopping them from doing it? Because you and many others obviously are trying to help veterans get their information, and it's
Right.
been great, tremendous success with VA Exchange on the provider side, right?
Oh yeah,
The VA.
we tried to connect VA under treatment use case. It works great. So which means the technique wise they're there. It
Oh
just
yeah,
turn on the switch for them. It's just question of switch on, switch off.
yeah, yeah.
So I don't
It's a good
know.
question, and I will put it on. I will prioritize that to get an answer for.
That'd be great. Can you share it with me once you get an answer as well?
Absolutely. I'll share it with I always talk about, I don't think I can do an office hours without talking about individual access services and where we are. So that's like a monthly situation.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else have any final questions for me? Dan, I see you're still hanging in there. That's awesome. Thank you.
I think it'd be great if we could see some of these presentations side by side. E-health response versus a care quality response versus an IAS response with the purpose clearly delineated side by side. All this is done in a policy vacuum. Healthcare is largely driven by policy people who don't actually sit in front of an EHR. And it would be helpful to see the presentations side by side. It's an amazing experience. We do it at a local level. The presentations are greatly different.
And Dan, when you say presentations, you mean how it looks when it gets into the like what's the provider's experience? Is that what you mean?
Yes, the end user experience. Absolutely. There's a lot of reasons why you can't do that, contractual and other, but nevertheless, it's relevant to the conversation. And given that the people that write the policy don't do that, they're missing a lot.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And
But I know
interesting problem to solve.
the challenge, Marilee.
Yeah, I know you do. Yes, you do. All right. Thanks, everyone. I will let you go because I think we are now just a minute or two